All right, I see it's 4 o'clock. So I'm going to call the March 8th, 2021 Select Board meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Ms. Escobedo,
Present?
Mr. Johnson,
Present.
Ms. Ackerman,
Present.
and myself, Ms. Biggs, present. Oh, and Ms. Hotchkiss.
Present.
Thank you. I was jumping the gun there. Okay.
And the full select board is here. That's terrific. All right. The consent agenda reads the town accountant warrants, March 4th, 2021, and a proclamation to proclaim the week of April 4th through April 11th as days of remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. Do I hear a motion to?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye.
Ms. Hotchkiss,
Hi.
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
and myself, Ms. Biggs. Aye.
And that's unanimous, and the chair so declares. We're ready for the town manager's report.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I guess the first thing is I distributed what I thought was my printed report Friday evening and was surprised last evening to discover that it hadn't gone out. So that is related to some ongoing exchange issues that I think I did forward a report from IT Director Jason Bulger, to kind of explain that it's not unique to Concord necessarily, but if you've had some emails that seem to be held up or lost in the ether, that's a system-wide and I think nationwide problem. And I think, I was planning on having him come to a future board meeting to talk about our upgrades and the importance of it. But obviously this latest situation kind of makes that even more important to have. So everyone's kind of aware of, that the board's aware as users of our network, what exactly is happening and the changes that are coming. So in the printed material, just a quick update on a couple of things. We did have a phase 2 clinic, or we are planning a phase 2 clinic, I think, for next week for our seniors, which is good. So then there'll be a couple hundred people, 75 and older, who will be fully vaccinated at that point in the community. And all the progress that we make on that is obviously a good thing. The more people that get vaccinated, the quicker the pandemic will end. We did receive some questions for clarification on our regional vaccination letter that we sent in on behalf of, or we didn't send it in, we signed on with the town of Bedford, who coordinated the letter. And so there is some dialogue with DPH about what that would look like. As I sit here now, I don't know if we're going to be approved or receive doses, but at least the dialogue is ongoing, and the legislators who represent those communities submitted a letter of support as well that I just received today. So I thank the legislators for backing us up on that. In the printed materials, I did include a presentation that was given at the middle school building committee meeting last week, where we haven't talked a lot about that project because of other headlines, but a lot of the work for the middle school planning has been ongoing. There's several subcommittees, notably the sustainability subcommittee and the design subcommittee, that have been really working extensively to talk about, sustainability, an approach to sustainability with the project, and also an approach to design, making sure that the design meets the educational needs and the educational program that has been developed for the middle school. So that was kind of a big moment for the project, and kind of having those recommendations made and accepted by the full committee. Obviously, we're still in feasibility, so nothing's kind of final on the in terms of the design, but there are certain design benchmarks that are notable, and the ones that you see in those slides are pretty notable benchmarks. So speaking of the schools, I didn't have it in there. I spoke to the superintendent today, and I don't want to speak for her now, but I do know that they will be announcing their response to the governor's requirement for schools to be in-person learning. I think they are working on their planning efforts and should have an announcement in the coming weeks, but they are actively planning on finding ways to meet that need or meet that requirement at the state level. So stay tuned on that, but they are actively working on it. And then just a few other smaller items. And I guess I don't need to dwell on them. I know we have a busy agenda tonight, so I'll just open up for questions.
So I'll start with a question, and that is, I noticed that the 140 vaccinations were given at the COA, which is wonderful. But I was under the impression that we weren't getting any additional vaccines to distribute. So I was wondering how that came about.
In the end, we did get addition. We are getting, I think we'll get them this week. Either we did receive them or are going to receive them this week. But in the end, DPH did reach out to our health department and said that they would give us the vaccines we need to do that second dose clinic. Okay,
good. Thanks.
Yeah, we did have a bit of a scare where we thought we weren't going to get second dose clinic vaccines, exactly. Which to be honest, it did happen to other communities. But we, and I want to give credit to Susan Rask, she communicated with DPH and they did clarify that they would be providing us doses to do that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Matt?
A question on the IT update, which is that I saw the details about the upgrades that were required, of course, to eliminate the vulnerability, but I didn't see any information about whether there was a breach, of our system, or whether we just simply were, doing this, of course, because to prevent such a future breach.
We're not aware of a breach. As we sit here now, it was that we were making some upgrades. We found out about it by doing some maintenance work, installing patches and things like that. But I'm not aware of any breach of our system. I think there's a vulnerability that
definitely
there's a national vulnerability, and we are trying to stay ahead of it. But I'm not, like I said, this isn't based on a response to a breach. This is based on a response to. This goes back a couple of weeks where we had server issues and then discovered that there were these patch issues related to the servers. And this is one of the reasons why we want to move to a cloud-based solution.
And any sense of the rough time frame for that migration?
It's still in the planning processes. We are working with a migration. We're getting proposals from migration vendors. So I would expect to know in the next couple of weeks. And that's a key point that I want Jason to be able to report on. So that's one of the reasons why we haven't talked about it in more detail yet. There are a few things to be nailed down, but we should have a plan in the next week or so.
Okay. Well, our company just went through it and we survived. So it can. But
it is an extensive. I'm actually glad to hear that. It's an extensive process.
Yeah.
And so we're doing a lot of pre-planning now. So we're not trying to figure it out as there are certain things you figure out as you go. This isn't one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jane.
Okay, Jane.
I'll chime in there too, because we've just moved everything over to Outlook or Microsoft 365, and it is not. It's not for the faint-hearted. One of these days, I'll understand how to fully access and utilize Teams, but we'll leave that alone. That being said, I have noticed a number of glips. I mean, are we still receiving, or is there still a delay and a bearing of emails, and or is everything going through the system? Do we know for a fact that, when I send an email through my Outlook account at the town, that it actually leaves the system?
I don't know that I can give you a 100% confident answer, other than to say.
I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, no. Other than to say, in Jason's report, there were issues Friday and Saturday, which is why an email that I sent, honestly, 5 minutes after Jeremy sent out the packet, and felt really good about getting it to you on Friday, which is why it says have a nice weekend. All of a sudden doesn't show up till Sunday night. I think that was consistent with what he was reporting. So there may be some that pop into the inbox after delay, but I don't know. It would be impossible for me anyway to know if things have been completely dropped.
Right. It might be helpful just to say, and we can just say it right now, which is that if people in in the public in Concord were looking for a response, certainly from one of the select board members, and didn't get it. Don't assume necessarily that we didn't send it.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I'm still getting, I'm still getting lots of emails. And so it's hard to tell
Right.
if something isn't coming through because plenty is still coming through. So I don't, it's not like, I mean.
We're not going to know what we don't get.
Yeah, exactly right. But lots of email traffic is coming in. And so I think it may be kind of, if it tried to pass through the system while a patch was happening, who knows? But I will say that it's not like we're not getting any. It's just, so if you feel like you sent something and didn't get a response, feel free to resend it.
Right. And then the other question I had, question/comment, was to do with the middle school building project, because that certainly, and I attended the candidates forum yesterday where we heard from the 4 candidates, one of whom is our chair, Linda, for select board speak. And what was really heartening is that every single one of the candidates, I believe, I can't think of any, were very positive about the middle school building project and process. And that to me says we should be capturing that somehow as a process that has benefited and really worked well in Concord. Because not all of with all good intentions, not every time we go forward in a capital plan or a capital project planning process or many others, have we had that sort of general positive feedback. And I've been hearing that in other places too, but this was pretty striking. So.
Yeah, if I can, and Susan and Matt both have experiences with the committee kind of pre-pause and now post-pause. As a committee member and someone who's on the leadership team, there is universal commitment to ensuring as robust a public discussion and a public vetting of the project as I've ever experienced on anything. And so, you know, I don't know that you can ever get to 100%, but there is really a strong commitment on the part of the committee to make sure that we give ample opportunity for public input. And so as we develop the schedule, you know, when there's a moment where if you push the schedule a little harder, you can get to an earlier move-in date or an earlier election date or something like that. I think the sense is we need to make sure that there's enough time for public engagement on the project. And so if the schedule has to slide a little bit to make sure that happens, like I said, I think there's a shared willingness to do that.
Okay. Any other questions for the town manager? Okay, if not, thank you. I'll move on to the chair's remarks. And forgive my redundancy here, but we can't say this enough. Just want to remind people that the warrant closes on March 26th at 4 o'clock. Drafts are due to the town manager's office on March 19th by noon, with the title clearly specified for the warrant article. The other comment I would make is that I happen to notice that we've received over the last couple of weeks correspondence that's been included in the packets or others have commented on in terms of safety issues for Junction Park. I did notice that it is on the Transportation Advisory Committee agenda for this Wednesday, but because there are both long and short-term concerns that are being expressed by the public, I'm also adding this to the Select Board agenda next week. So that concludes my chair's remarks. The next item is the Townhouse Renovation update. And is, sorry.
I'll just ask a quick question. Thank you for adding Junction Park to our agenda. I think that's really important. And is there a way to notify, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved in that. Can we somehow notify as many as we can think of that it's going to be on our agenda? So in case
I can certainly try in terms of the communication that I'm aware of that has been directed to the Select Board. And obviously announcing it today is an effort to give people an opportunity to reach out to others as well.
I would just add to that also that to reiterate the first conversation, well, it's not the first, but it will also be on the Transportation Advisory Committee's agenda on Wednesday. Now it will be.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, I did mention that, but thank you for reminding everyone of that. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the townhouse renovation update. And let's see, is Kate here to address that?
Yes, I am.
Kate, you are wonderful. Welcome, and we're anxious to hear the update.
Great. I'm hoping to be able to share my screen.
Okay.
Can folks see this? Excellent.
Love the curtain.
Ta-da! So good evening. I am Kate Hodges, and I'm the Deputy Town Manager, and I'm here this evening with Ryan Orr, who is our Facilities Director. And Ryan and I have been the project leads for the Townhouse Renovation Project, which began this past summer and has been going on for the last 7 months. And while Ryan and I are confident that the final product, which the public will see upon completion, will be head and shoulders above where we had started, you can imagine that renovating a nearly 200-year-old building has had its host of problems. And we weren't entirely surprised by them, but we didn't necessarily anticipate the volume. And so tonight, Ryan and I are here to give the board and the members of the public an idea of the issues and some of the barriers that we've seen and many that we've overcome throughout these past several months. As Ryan and I prepared this afternoon to talk to you all about this evening, we really want to make sure that we reiterate how exciting and worthwhile this project is. The former layout of the first floor of the townhouse was deficient in so many ways, and really this is very, very necessary. Ryan has specifically worked hand in hand with the contractors to develop innovative and cost-saving approaches and ideas for how we can overcome many of these barriers. And we just felt like we were bringing you a host of problems, and we didn't want anyone to lose sight of all of the positives related to this project. Again, particularly when tonight's update is focused mainly on the challenges. So that's my my one positive plug, because I think this is really exciting and worthwhile. So this is the original plan that was received that we originally went out to bid with. And effectively, this captured everything that we thought we knew about the townhouse at the time. Again, 200-year-old building is, particularly challenging, and it's sort of a learning experience for all of us as we go. So originally, the restrooms were added off of the front lobby area, and they were going to be side by side. And generally speaking, all of the walls and the soffits were able to kind of close in these areas here, which you can see, which are the existing columns and support posts. Of course, when the demolition of the first floor began, we were able to see where things were located within the walls, and a bit of a different picture formed. This is sort of an updated layout that's really zeroed in sort of on this area here, which is the payroll office. If I go back, you can see that the payroll office was, you were coming in the door, and this was one big open area, and it became very obvious that one of the payroll administrators, who's also one of the assistant treasurers, needs to be able to have an office there, but that having an office here would not allow this person to have access to natural light. And so we had some redesign to do. Additionally, there were some columns that were found to be where we were going to have the recessed message boards and boards that are both for, public meetings and public information. So we needed to do some redesign there. Here is just a kind of a larger scope of what we were doing. You can see that the toilet rooms changed a bit. There was some existing issues with the soffit here. We had a fire panel that was here that was going to be extremely expensive to move. And so this was Ryan's sort of compromise to that, is to save on removing this panel and have the door. One door you can enter from here, another here. Through this, we were able to have both of these bathrooms remain ADA accessible, whereas the other options did not allow for that. So again, we're excited about that. And here you can just see they're pointing out these are the existing piers from the basement. And so we're trying to contend with that. So this is just the first floor with all the walls gutted and the ceiling removed. You can see, you know, some of these columns we knew were existing, others which you can't capture in the entire picture here were not. This is the original exterior wall of the townhouse on the left-hand side before the addition in the back was put on. So as you can see, it became apparent that the brickwork certainly had been compromised and it needed to be shored up to ensure stability. This is an existing pipe we didn't know was there that was kind of buried in the wall. What we once thought were some of the electrical and data connections and chases were actually turned out in some cases to be several inches and in a couple of other cases kind of feet off of where we thought. And so the redesign of this area and how we were going to be able to place walls so that we don't have to compromise the structural integrity of the building really became a bit of a challenge. And so it caused us to have a little bit of a delay and a step back. In this photo, just by way of an example, you can show this person right here is showing where in his arms the recessed tack board was supposed to be. And of course, this is a support beam. And so we certainly couldn't put it there. And so everything sort of had to shift down a bit. It was about 2 feet that we had to shift, which doesn't seem like a lot, but certainly when you're talking about office spaces and hallways, 2 feet is pretty significant. Once we started ripping up the subfloor, the real fun began. Once exposed, the largest challenge, I think, probably to date, was that we had several layers of underlayment that were inconsistent in both height and depth throughout the entirety of the first floor. And we discovered asbestos tiles in the back area near what was going to be our new conference room that we needed to encapsulate. And so here you can see sort of a small portion of the flooring from what now is going to be the entrance to the finance administration, complete with these holes and borings that were not put in by us, but needed to be addressed as far as fire safety. This post, which you can see here, was completely unknown to us at the time and was buried inside of a wall. And so we needed to shift the walls down, much like we did to the other side, in order to bury this new founded post again. And so it caused, again, the public service area counters to shift down slightly. It's still functional, but again, it was a redesign. This is an interesting snapshot of the exploratory work that we did to determine what we were talking about for subfloor. So as you can see, I've never seen a subfloor of so many layers, but essentially it had 2 layers of subfloor, a finished floor on top of it consisting of yellow birch, and then 2 additional layers of plywood underlayment. This is just one section. As we worked our way down towards the back, we actually got up to 4 layers of underlayment, which was certainly a challenge. And so we had to remove all of that, and Ryan had to work with the guys that are on the team to basically shoot a laser level and level it off, so the new flooring that we would put in wouldn't be working on an elevation. So as we started to take up the floor, which now you can see here is a nice, even keel here down a hallway, it became apparent that simply stopping here, which is what we were originally going to do, and not dealing with the first floor lobby area or the vestibule really wasn't going to be something that we could do. It would have caused a transition area that would not have been ADA or AAB accessible. And also aesthetically, it just would look pretty funny. And so what we did was we put in our initial change order and asked that the underlayment and the floor continue out into the lobby area area and include the stairway so that we could have the treads be able to be rubberized, similar to what we were doing in some of the area out here, and that this entirety of the floor will be here. So you'll see this big opening once it gets done. This is going to be a pretty glass window so that you can have the natural light from the lobby area. It'll have the town seal here on the floor. And then of course, these will be, that's a restroom. And then here's finance. That's the town clerk. On this end is accounting, and then treasury. This will be a solid wall with a door in the back that will be accessible for staff only. In there is another staff restroom, a small conference room, the mailbox and postage area, file storage, and a copy room. So I'm going to hand it over now to Ryan. That's going to go through some of the more specific challenges.
I'm muted. Everybody can hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So what you're looking at here is, so in addition to, structural supports that Kate just pointed out on the first floor, we also needed to look at some of the barriers which existed in the basement level that impacted design and load bearing capabilities on the upper level. Here you can see one of the support columns on the left side of the page, which was broken or probably shaved down to fit another system at one point in the past. And then on the right side, you can see that there's old exposed and crumbling bricks in the window, which we're worried could present a problem, which we're considering where we might put other fixtures and pipes and putting a load on anything, which is something we're looking into a little bit further. So here, once framing was complete, small sections of the exterior wall were explored to determine the best course of action related to finish work. As you can see here, the exterior walls of the building are brick. However, at some point, probably early on after it was built, they added strapping and lath to support the horsehair plaster that's currently on the walls now. There was also, at one point prior to this project, wainscoting and a chair rail that was installed on the lower level of the walls that wasn't necessarily buried, but some of the framing support for it was buried within the wall, making the wall uneven in areas, which has cracked over time. So an example of a crack would be in the top right-hand corner of this slide. There's a crack there on the gray wall. That is where the chair rail was originally, where they kind of just buried the framing from it. So one of the things we've been looking at is whether or not this, because of all the cracks in the existing horsehair plaster, we've been looking at, or we've talked about, whether or not we should remove all of the wallboard and all the old lath. In doing that, we would need to bring all of the insulation up to code. As you can see, there's no insulation in these walls, and there's only 3/4 of an inch in most places to be able to put insulation. So in order to do that, we would have to reframe all of the interior wall, or all of the perimeter walls on the interior of the building for the exterior walls. We would have to reframe those in order to get enough depth to add the insulation to bring it up to code. So because of that, it's going to add a lot of time to the project, and the dollar value is really going to climb if we do that. So I think because of that, we're probably going to opt out of removing all of that and extending the project any further. So another barrier we found was related to the amount of wiring, both live and non-working. That was inside the existing ceiling and within the walls. It became very difficult to discern what was necessary and what was necessary to keep and what was old. But the guys did spend quite a bit of time trying to figure that out and what was, where the circuits actually went to and if they were needed. When the electrical inspector showed up for the rough inspection, he noticed many of the existing wires dangling from the ceiling and requested that we secure everything that's hanging down, not leave it the way it is, which has added quite a bit of time to the job. As you can see here, 10 days, but it does, it is throughout the entire ceiling. I mean, 90% at least. So it's pretty necessary that they do that. So moving on to the next one. So this is another example of the existing conditions. As you can see here, the data that was there before and kind of hanging all over the place also needs to be tied up. But luckily we had CMLP come out and give us a hand running all new data for these new offices. And they did a great job bundling up the cables. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, a picture of what it should look like. And that's thanks to CMLP for giving us a hand with that. So. This year, the left slide shows more exposed wires, which we just talked about again. The right is the new hallway leading to the conference room, and the back stairway, which is not public space, but will be used by staff. Unfortunately, this area it didn't have a light or an occupancy sensor spec'd out in the plans. So that's something that we are now additionally having to do at this point. In this picture here, the left picture is an exposed hot water line, originally concealed within the cabinet in the women's bathroom. We decided not to leave it that way. In order to, if we were to leave it, we were going to have to cut up the new cabinetry and ruining the integrity of it. Not to mention leaving it exposed inside the cabinet, considering it's a hot water line, we were going to have to add insulation to it so it didn't become a burn hazard for anyone reaching in the cabinet to get anything. So because of all that, we determined that it was probably best to conceal the pipe within the wall. This wall, very much like the rest of the exterior walls, this isn't an exterior wall anymore, but was at one point. So it's strapping over the brick. So it's really difficult we can't just snake a new pipe in. So the easiest way for them to do that is to go into the crawl space below, drill up, and send the pipe up from there. So it's a little more difficult than what it seems looking at the picture, but we felt that was probably the best approach for it. This here is just, these slides are just kind of showing some of the poles, some of the support columns that had to remain that we are finding to be difficult. Their locations are kind of tough to lay out furniture around, but we've been pretty creative with it, and we found some ways to tie in some bookshelves with it, or even just tie in small half walls, just to give the office spaces a little bit more privacy. So we haven't figured it out for all of them yet, but we're working on some creative ways to work with them since they're not going anywhere. So, but anyway, so that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
The last thing that I just want to share is that the project was originally supposed to be completed in April, but that was assuming we were starting earlier than we had. So we actually started this project in earnest right around the 16th of November. and it was projected at the time with no change orders to take about 174 days. Right now, we have 24 potential change orders. We have approved 9 of those to the tune of about $35,000. The original project and scope was $678,000. I assume we'll have probably about $100,000 in overall change orders when all is said and done. Some of the ones that have been proposed have either been rejected outright by the town because we don't feel they're necessary, or Ryan and I have worked with the contractor and the architects to be able to kind of change the scope a bit. And so right now we are expecting final inspections to happen sometime around the 18th of June. From there, there'd be a final cleaning and a punch list, and the end completion date to be around the 15th of July. And that is if there are no other change orders or other conditions to be found. Now, I know that seems like a pipe dream, but we've literally gone through the entire ceiling, floor, all of the walls, all the demolition is done. And so the ability to be able to put things back in their place and kind of finish up with the finish work is really going to start in earnest right now. And so we aren't expecting many more surprises than what we have found.
Well, long overdue, an amazing undertaking. A lot still ahead of you, I can see. Wow.
Yeah, Linda, if I could just add one point.
Sure.
So when Kate showed the design that we went out to bid with, when we started the project, I think I said here that we expect that everyone who's in there now will go back in there. And one of the things that has happened is because of some of the design changes and some of the other workarounds that we've had to do to advance the project may make it so we have to reassess, where everybody goes. And as you can see, a lot of square footage that used to be employee spaces is now, there's a conference room that wasn't there, and there are 2 bathrooms that weren't there. So we are also in the process of talking about, is there really room for people to work comfortably in there? And do we need some potential office realignments? One of the positive things we've learned during COVID-19 is that people can work pretty well from, other locations. So we'll report more on that certainly as we get closer to reopening it. But it's possible that there will be, the core offices that Kate detailed are all going to remain there: clerk, treasurer, auditor, accounting, finance. But there may be more non-public facing staff that may be in other locations.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the select board members?
Jane was first.
We need little paddles that say something like an auction. First of all, thank you. That was what an undertaking. I am deeply regretting that we didn't sign up for this old town hall and get the entire project paid for by NPR or GBH, because clearly, I mean, the storyline reads like something you'd watch on Home and Gardens television or something. So, maybe there's a future here. We don't know. And I will, as my colleagues probably know, although it was previous select boards that heard the most of this, I'm always a little concerned because there's a part of this entire process that separate of the undertaking, separate of all of the challenges, and separate of all of the incredible work being done, that still feels like we're trying to Band-Aid for a while, because the townhouse is a 200-year-old building, and we're advancing in the world with more needs and more capabilities. So as this project, and I think Stephen just suggested, the loss of space may now indicate the need to put town staff in another location. Not surprising. There's no finger pointing here. There's just sometimes you wonder how long it's until you have to swallow something a little differently. That being said, one question I did have was on the decision that Ryan mentioned, and I think Kate probably was alluding to when she was talking about how they've been working diligently to keep costs down, which is the decision to not to take out the horsehair and go back to original because of the cost. I guess my question is, what's that trade-off there? I know there's a trade-off, so I just want to know what that trade-off is in terms of potential future impact or future things that we can't anticipate because we didn't go in.
Yeah. So I can let Ryan basically answer the latter part of that, but what I can say is what we believe will happen is that a few months to several months after the walls are painted, you'll be able to see some of the imperfections and the cracks in the walls. Structurally, it isn't an issue. It's aesthetics. The one thing that, and as soon as he said this, I said, "Oh, Jane's going to eat this one up," because the walls aren't going to be insulated on the exterior, and so, of course, there's a trade-off for that. When we asked the architect, just give me a ballpark of what you think, they were talking in the 300,000 range to take all of that down and put it all the way back up again. And that would have been before so they would have to, that doesn't include removing what they've already done. And so you're talking about essentially paying for the project twice over. But now I'll give the good stuff to Ryan so he can answer.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add to that other than this really didn't come up until pretty recent. So the walls, most of the interior partition walls were already up and wall boarded, and they were already starting to put the finished coats on when they did some exploratory in the exterior wall. So we probably could have figured early on that maybe there was an insulation in there, but it wasn't anything that the architects explored for us as an option. And it really, I mean, like I said, you would lose a lot more square footage in the building by adding a perimeter wall in there. So we're already losing a ton of space as it is for all the partition walls we put in. If we were to take that much more space out, I don't know how we would fit anybody in there, to be honest with you. Good news is those walls are about 12 inches thick. So when you walk into your basement, and it feels pretty warm, you're partially below grade, but also you do get a decent insulation value out of a 10-inch thick wall or a 12-inch thick wall. So we'd probably gain something by spray foaming and building new walls. But like I said, at this stage in the game, I think it would cost us a lot of money and a lot of time. And I think we would be putting a lot more people out into different buildings by doing so because of the loss of, it should have been something that was planned up front if that were to be if we were going to try to do that. So we would know truly how much space we had for everyone, as I think we'd be doing a lot more reorganization if we changed it now.
I mean, I think part of the thing was at the beginning, we wanted to, not say do the minimum, but be as efficient with the project as we possibly could in terms of spaces that were going to be disrupted, and we wanted to basically, I think, have a 1-for-1 renovation. So the operations could go back in the way they were there. The other thing I'll say is, it is a 200-year-old building, but the space we were renovating has been touched many times over the course of the 200 years, and I think as the photos showed, and it's not intended to sound disparaging, but there were Band-Aids all over the place. And so one of the things we're trying to do in this effort is to remove those and do those and kind of make up for some construction choices like the underlayment of the floor and leveling out the floor is something that probably has been a problem for decades, and it just wasn't addressed in prior renovation iterations. And so we're addressing that now. And I think, as Ryan said, if we looked at this as a total gut rehab at the very beginning, it may have been something different, but we were looking at it as a relatively modest renovation, and that's what we thought was the best way to move forward at the time.
So how confident, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that total gut rehab in retrospect does look like might have been a better solution. It just working around all this stuff adds up. And while there's a lot of stuff that inevitably features that are undocumented or they're not where you expected them to be, I was particularly surprised about the metal column. And I would have assumed, I mean, that's obviously more recent, and that should have been on somebody's plan somewhere. It's kind of shocking that it would be just showing up out of nowhere. But my ultimate question, though, is can you remind me how many square feet this renovation is, the scope of the renovation? And like how many dollars per square foot this is going to end up costing in the end? Likely, with that $700K, it sounds like it's going to be $700K or so all in.
I don't want to misquote it, so if you give me a second, I can look it up. But I did want to just comment on the first part of it. So prior to Stephen's arrival, we did this facilities master plan, which I think we started in 2016. So I believe Jane is the only one who has lived through every iteration of this. But we did have someone come in and take a look at a complete gut. And what that was going to call for was basically taking the entire building floor to ceiling, including through the basement, and shoring it up on the side with iron and bars in order to be able to support additional structures and whatever, any other load that we're going to put there, because of the column that I showed you is one of many columns that were shaved by whomever. And so the total cost of that was $4.7 million. And to do that, at the time, we discussed that as a senior management team and thought, boy, for $4.7 million, we could do an entire, CPW campus and or purchase a whole nother building. And so this very much was the bare bones that we could do. The other thing we have to consider is, because this building isn't entirely ADA compliant, I mean, we're getting there, but we're not. We had to apply for a variance, and that variance allows us to spend X amount of dollars over the course of a 5 to 7 year period. And so doing that would have caused an entire upgrade of the entire exterior and everything else that is in the townhouse, including making the elevator accessible all the way to the attic, which added another 1.5 million. And when we talked to the historical commission about that, we would have had to have a bump out on the roof. And that was less than favorably received. So I know that's a lot of information. I just dumped it all on you, but if you're interested in any of those documents, we still have them, and I'm happy to send them along just so you can kind of see how we got here.
The plan.
And I think just to build on Kate's point, that the takeaway from that isn't it's $4.5 million or what we spent, and so let's find a sweet spot in between. It's if you get beyond what we're doing now, there's no mid-range. You're up into the millions at that point. As if anybody knows from working on, especially on historic buildings, a lot of times it's in for a penny, in for a pound, and that would have definitely been the case here. And like I said, the approach that was chosen, I think, makes sense, even with the challenges that we are encountering. And I think, as Kate said, we're at the phase of the project where we're talking about the tough stuff, but it is going to be a really great work environment for the people in those departments.
And then since there's an expected $100,000 overage, I assume that exceeds contingency. So was there budgetary impact? No, it doesn't exceed it.
No, we budgeted a 30% contingency because of the unknowns. And so we built that in. And actually the bid that came in was also $120,000 under what our projected was. So While we aren't giving the store away by any means, that's why I said I'm projecting about 100. It's within budget and scope.
Okay, because I mean, the reason I asked for the square footage, it sounds like the bottom line is not that shocking, really.
Yeah, it's about 3,000 square feet, and I would say we're probably looking at, roughly right around $230.
Yeah, that's not shocking at all by local standards. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
He's absolutely right. It's 3,150
Okay.
square feet.
Thanks a lot.
So how, and again, thank you for all the work that's been done on this. How confident are you right now that those July targeted dates will reasonably hold?
I think that's pretty. I mean, the contractors the other day were saying that they're really hoping to be, finishing up earlier than that. So those were kind of worst case scenario what they were giving us. So I'm pretty confident that we'll meet those deadlines.
And have you?
I am as well. We talked to them. They have another. They bid the jobs as they can meet the demand with their crew, and I think that they have another couple of jobs lined up, and so they're quite motivated to be able to do what they need to do. And some of the holdups have been on our end and not theirs, so they've been very good to work with.
Okay, good. And then have you dealt with significant materials availability through this process?
We struggled with getting the doors in. That was I don't know, I think it was like an 11-week lead time to get the interior, to get the doors.
But in general, you haven't come up against
that, only that one. And we ran into an issue with getting breakers. We had a GE panel, and the breakers for that panel, what we needed, were supposedly going to be months out. They sped it up and got them to us a little bit faster. But from the manufacturer, they didn't have them to distribute. I can't remember what the number was. It was a large number of requests throughout the country, and we were just mixed in with that within those requests. But we luckily enough that they pushed that forward by a few weeks, and we were able to get it. But that was a major struggle too. So.
Okay, good. But in general, you're getting the materials you need. Other than those specific ones. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Well, it sounds like an enormous project. I can see why you say there are both challenges and a lot of excitement about what this is going to look like in the end. So we're all looking forward to the townhouse reopening. So thank you. Okay,
Susan and Terry had their hands up on this.
Okay, sorry. Again, I just can't see all these people here. Susan.
I just had a question about the structure. It does sound exciting, and it's a beautiful building. So I'm looking forward to seeing the finished product. But Ryan, you had mentioned that the perimeter walls in the basement were 10 to 12 inches thick. Is that correct?
That's perimeter walls throughout the entire building.
Okay, that was my question.
Yep.
All the way up. Okay.
All the way up.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And Terry, you have a question? Sure.
Yes, what an amazing project. Thanks to everybody who's working so hard on it. And we can see now all the Band-Aids that have been done over the years. I would like to put in a quick pitch that since we have Ryan, and I think in the previous iterations of this, we didn't have a facilities director. So it's likely that this building will have renovations again in 20 years, 50 years, whatever. So Ryan and team, if you could document this time so there's fewer surprises.
Absolutely. The Classic Construction is actually documenting for us, and they're going to supply us with pictures throughout the entire project. So yeah, no, it's going to be much easier to find where something is in a wall later on down the road. It's definitely gonna make things simpler for us. So they've been great about that, about documenting for us. And we have plenty of pictures as well that we've been taking.
Right.
But I look forward to actually seeing what they provide us with. It sounds
right. And I think
the end of The end of the
As-built, right?
contract also calls for an as-built to be
Yeah.
delivered over, and so we'll have that with the others that are, in the town's archives. So when we are all on to
Right.
bigger and better things, someone can be able to look that up. So
Right. That'll be the challenge. We'll be preserving that for 20 years or however many years you have to preserve it, including all the things that we didn't do, like the insulation and things like that. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, very much. We're going to move on now to the next agenda item, which is considering the potential warrant articles that are the select board is being asked, trying to determine the status on and their moving forward. The first one is a Climate Action Advisory Board draft warrant article on authorizing the town of Concord to adopt and enforce local regulations restricting new fossil fuel infrastructure in certain conditions. I think and I see Kate Hanley is returned, and I'm guessing, I don't know if Jake is here as well. Jake Swenson is here as well. So we heard a lot about this last week. We asked you to speak with Carmen before coming back, and the reason we did that is we had questions about the format that in terms of how the warrant article was brought to us. So Kate and Jake, can you address what's happened since the last meeting?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Kate Hanley, Sustainability Director. We shared, and I believe it's in the meeting packet, an updated text of the draft warrant article. And this was reviewed by Carmen. I'm actually going to see if Alice is on, if she can answer specifically any questions that Carmen had, because she was the one who had that conversation, if that's okay, Linda.
Okay, thank you. Alice Kaufman?
Hi there, thank you. So we did have a great conversation with Carmen last week. It was a great suggestion from the board that we do that earlier in the process. So Carmen reviewed the warrant article. She also talked with town council because we had a question about I think it was to think about the question that Terry Ackerman had raised, is what are we dealing with? Is it a warrant article? Is it a bylaw? What do we have here? And it's actually both rolled up into one, which is the way it was intended. And it is a process that's doable, allowable, and being done. So it says the same Article 40 that was presented last year that was going to be moved ahead to town meeting. And then, of course, you heard, the AG's decision, we pulled it back until we could regroup. So this is the Article 40, but instead of just Article 40, we're asking the legislature for the authority to implement Article 40 because we don't have that authority right now. So it's Article 40 plus the authority that we need to be able to enact and then to administer Article 40.
Okay, a good explanation. So I think I'll just comment again. If I was reading the most recent version, and I think I was, there was still an article number on there that's probably not yet been determined. So I would just make sure you maybe
know where it goes.
Yeah, remove that, and so it's not confusing to people. So I think what I'm going to do now is we've got a lot of material to cover here. If there are any new questions that need to be asked of the representatives here, otherwise I'm looking to see if we just have general consensus from select board members to move this forward for the select board hearing. Again, we're not taking a position on the article today. This is just a disposition and a request from the presenters that it be on the select board's hearing agenda. Okay, I see at least one head nodding. Let me see if I can see the other select board members here. 2, 3. Okay, I've got general consensus, and so thank you, presenters. Do your thing with filing this with the town manager's office and getting ready to have this presented as a warrant article. So thank you for taking this extra step and coming back to us.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. The next one, and then again, well, we're not taking a position today, but this one's a little bit different in the sense that the select board needs to determine whether or not they're going to be submitting an article for housing appropriation. So we've, since our last meeting, well, let me say, I think Matt, as I recall, put on the table a possible level of funding for an appropriation that would go forward. If I remember correctly, I think we had general consensus from board members, but we'll check that again today as we talk about what would be in the content of this warrant article if we are going to go forward. We have since seen, I think, 2 different letters from the public, from housing groups encouraging us to submit a warrant article. And I think they've gone further and even recommended the full amount of $500K. So I think this one is open for a little more discussion from the select board members. Who would like to weigh in? Matt, I see your hand first, so I'm going to call on you.
Well, all I'd like to say is that, while we can't increase the scope by raising the number, we can reduce the scope by lowering the number through amendment. So one possibility, given that we don't have clear sense yet of free cash, I mean, other than that it's going to be tight, is that we could set an initial amount that was on the high side, and then have, if needed be, reduce that amount as we approach town meeting.
Yep. Thank you. Susan?
I was thinking along similar lines, because that there's nothing to prevent us from reducing it if at town meeting or before that, but when we get more firmer numbers on free cash, we think that it's not tenable, we can amend it.
Yep. Okay. Jane?
I'm fully in agreement. I don't see any value to anticipating something we don't know yet when we can easily rectify closer to. So.
Okay. Terry, did you want to weigh in? You don't need to, but if you would like to.
Well, I could go along with that, but I think when we get to the time when we're going to take a position, I'd just like to see maybe a 1-page report or a 1-minute report about, again, what's been spent from 19 and 20, and what do we project will be left, say 6 months from now, because I don't want to appropriate. I know we want to have contingency in there, but I don't want to go overboard either. We want to get the right balance.
Yep. And we also need to consider the time lapse going forward from any decision that would be made at this point. So, yeah. So, okay. Good point, Jane.
I just wanted to follow up on what Terry said and remind everybody, I mean, I don't know whether anybody saw the news and notices today, but, there was a notice on the new affordable housing unit that we used town funds for to buy down at the Emerson Annex, I believe it's called that. So, I mean, we have an example right now of a use of funds.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'm hearing a general consensus that we are ready to move forward with a warrant article for affordable housing. I think I'm hearing correctly that we would initially submit it at the 500K level, as we have done in the previous years. And again, we're not taking a position on this today. This is specifically about what our position on it, but what we're trying to determine is whether this will be added to our select board hearing in terms of the warrant articles. So can I see the thumbs up again from, or not, as the case may be, from our select board members in terms of general consensus? All right, and I think we do have that, and so that will be added. Thank you. The next one is the status of the neonicotinoids prohibition. I've recently learned that, and I see that Mark Hansen is here, let me say that, who was on that committee. Thank you for being here, Mark. But before I ask you to speak, let me just say that, and there are others in the audience who are also interested in this, I'm sure. Let me just say that I've since learned that the Massachusetts Pesticides Board recently took action to move the categorization of the neonicotinoids from an agricultural non-structural use to a restricted category. And so that may in fact accomplish much of what was originally intended by this warrant article. So Mark, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. This was really a nice breakthrough. I've just recently written an email off to Carolyn Dykema, we've been working for the last 2 years with the legislature to get some motion on restricting over-the-counter sales of neonics. And I'm asking her what the differences are between what was moved last March 1st or March 3rd, I guess it was, sorry, and what she was after. It's a good step in the right direction. It's not the solution to our problem, but it is definitely a good step in the right direction.
So if this was not moved this year, given that the recent activity that was taken, do you feel that there might be other means to educate the public about this, or?
Yeah, very definitely. Yeah, we in our research the last couple of years, we found some very interesting, I mentioned it in an email I've sent to some of you, well, for example, there's a deficiency in the reporting of the application of pesticides in the state. And I think there's simple improvements that we could work for with the state and with our town to improve that. There also, we need to do more work to categorize the populations of particularly native pollinators and to get some feeling for how the effect of, some of you may have seen the survey I did in 2017 of beehive failures distributed over the town in different at different locations. That particular year, hives did very well up in the northwest part of Concord, for example. And so there's more work that needs to be done to educate the public on what we can do to reduce neonics. Just one example, we have 2 golf courses in Concord, and one uses almost 10 times the amount of neonics as the other one. So we need to get those folks together and perhaps work toward a more efficient use of the pesticide.
All right. So I know that the original Pollinators Committee, actually their charge extended through last year's town meeting.
Yeah.
And I know that there's some interest in reactivating that committee, which would allow you to, regroup and look at new ways going forward to educate the public. Which is a separate item from what we're discussing right now today in terms of whether or not there's a necessity at this time, given the recent action from the Mass Pesticide Board, to still go ahead and push for that, reconsideration for the original warrant that you were looking at last year, or whether or not it makes more sense to go ahead and not today, but perhaps very soon, to reactivate the committee.
Yeah.
Take a look at where you are and move from there.
Yeah, I thought the original point of this meeting was, for example, we had an article for the warrant last year and was put off because of COVID. I think it would be very wise to go ahead and move that this year.
Okay, so you would still like to be there as opposed to reactivating the committee and letting them analyze the information that just came down from the Mass Pesticide Board.
Well, they're two distinct things. The article we've moved last year that the committee worked together with a number of people, including the Ag Committee, was to restrict the town from any new leases of town land would be kept free of neonics.
Yeah, okay.
It didn't affect existing leases, but it was for new leases. And it's completely separate from what was recently passed at the state. That affected the ability of, for example, Ace Hardware to sell neonics, and that doesn't go into effect until a year from this coming July.
Okay.
So they're separate issues.
Okay, I can hear that's where you're coming from. All right, and we did hear from some members of the public last week. We also heard from the Ag Committee saying that they were not willing to take a position on this at this point. So are there any specific additional questions from the Select Board? Members? Okay.
I mean, are we supposed to be taking a position on this one?
Again, we're trying to determine the disposition status in terms of whether it would appear on the Select Board hearing of warrant articles.
Can I offer one comment?
Yes.
If you recall back, I think it was in 2016, I put forth a petition article to the town, Article 48, which passed nearly unanimously. And the language of that article was that the town would take actions to reduce the use of neonics in the town, including town land. And I think this article is very compatible with the will of the town meeting in 2016. And I think if we don't do this, I think it's kind of running counter to that.
All right. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Jane, I see your hand up.
Well, as the liaison without committee, in terms of the neonics, in terms of the pollinator committee, I am looking forward to regrouping with that committee in my waning hours on the Select Board. Sorry about this. This is a rambunctious dog that has not been played with enough for her liking. But I have to say I agree with Mark that this is a separate issue, and I really did take heart. And Steve can speak to this separately if I'm misrepresenting, but in not opposing the warrant article, it seems that we're hearing from the Agricultural Committee as it's seeing it as not an impact on any of the ongoing commercial concerns right now. Now, that may be overstating, but, and I see Steve is going to raise his hand now. And that would be my only reason for not promoting this warrant article now, would be if something's changed, because we were going to put it on a town meeting, but for the pandemic.
Okay. Steve, I see your hand, but if you'll let me finish with the Select Board first, please. Terry?
Right. Well, Steve may end up saying what I'm going to say more articulately, but I did attend the Agricultural Committee discussion about this, being the liaison. And the thing that has changed I guess, is this new pesticide board ruling. And I think, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Agriculture Committee feels that that new ruling is going to take care of a lot of the problem, and therefore we may not need this article.
Okay, any other comments from select board members? Okay, Steve Earle, are you speaking for the Ag Committee today? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Make it there now?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you speaking for the Ag Committee today?
Just to re-emphasize a statement that's on record, but I have some personal comments if they're applicable.
Okay. All right. If you'll just state your name and address, please, if you're speaking on your own behalf.
Okay, Stephen Verrill, 415 Plainfield Road.
Okay.
And I would just add that the pesticide board put an additional restriction in this that I haven't seen anyplace else, and that any third party or private contractor applying it to somebody's yard would have to have a written acknowledgement from the landowner that they knew what was going on. And aside from that, I just say that I think a number of the possible substitutes for neonic are more harmful to both bees and people than the neonics are. And the bee inspector has said that in the last decade, there have been a few bee kills that are documented toward pesticides, but none toward neonics.
Okay.
I would just say that my feeling is we should leave the regulation of pesticides to the professionals on the state pesticide board.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And again, your comments notwithstanding, we're not here today to debate this necessarily, but we are trying to at least reach a reasonable conclusion among ourselves and the select board about putting this forward. Let me just check one thing here. Okay, I'll take one more comment on this, Pamela Dritt, but I would ask you to make your comments very brief.
Thank you.
Your name and your address, please.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green.
Thank you.
I'd like to consider Mr. Hansen's comments as true. I understand that even if it did have an impact on the local agricultural things, with all due respect, Mr. Verrill, even if other things are just as bad, that is not a reason not to get rid of the bad one. We must restrict this. We already had it go through town meeting once before. This would be irresponsible not to pass it.
Okay.
Please do.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you very much. All right, I'm coming back to the select board. And again, you know, our effort determining whether or not we're ready to add this to the select board hearings for public discussion. Okay. I'm looking for a general consensus again from the select board members. Okay, I see.
I think it's worth having the debate anyway. It seems like there are enough different opinions and there's just enough change in the air that it's worthy to get a discussion at a hearing.
Yeah, and I see Jane agreeing with that. Susan, I can't see you. Let's see. Susan, do you agree with that?
I'm torn, but I think I would, with two of my colleagues wanting to move forward, I don't see there's a harm in debating it. I'm not sure it's a that the article should be moved forward, but I will defer to my colleagues.
Okay. Terry, you ready to have this move forward?
I guess I agree with Susan. And Matt, let's have the debate, but
All right.
not read the article.
That's the general consensus, and that will be. And so I would just encourage you, Mr. Hanson, to check back in with the town manager's office and make sure you've refiled the warrant to meet their guidelines. And if in fact you want to reinstate that committee, work with Jane Hotchkiss, your liaison, and we'll put that back on the select board agenda.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And for everyone who's weighed in with their comments. Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda is the appointment of election officers. And there is a list in our packet today. I don't know if we've got Kari here to speak to this or not. I'm not seeing her. All right, so I would just remind everybody that obviously March 25th is the town election, and early voting has already opened. And so do I hear a motion to accept the appointments?
Move to appoint the election officers as described in the memo from Kari Tari dated March 5th, 2021.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye?
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Hotchkiss,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
and myself, Ms. Bates, aye.
That's unanimous and the chair so declares. The next item is committee nominations, and we appear to have none today. Committee liaison reports. Who would like to go first? Susan.
Okay, I'll go first. I went to a couple of meetings, but I first wanted to mention, as all of us hopefully saw, that Concord was featured on Chronicle last Monday evening, and it was a really interesting, and I learned a lot. I learned things I didn't know before, so I was grateful to have that exposure for our town. I went to the Conservation Coffee on Tuesday, and Delia reported that an offer has been made for the land manager position, which was approved in last year's town budget. And they've, been conducting the search, but they're waiting to hear about their offer.
Susan, if I may interrupt, I think he has accepted.
Oh, wonderful. We have a land manager. Terrific.
Yeah, Will Holden is his name.
Okay. There were a number of comments on the neonic warrant article relative to pollinator populations and the citing of inconsistent usage by different people. March 22nd from 12 to 1, the League is having an environmental session that involves Tammy Gouveia, Mike Barrett, Kate Hanley, and Alice Hoffman about this home rule petition that we discussed today. Capital Planning Task Force met, and I wasn't able to attend the whole meeting because I had a conflict, but the part that I heard, they were going through the capital planning report from 2003 and looking at the recommendations and making comments on those and whether they wanted to include them in the current version. Cemetery Committee met on the 3rd, and they spent a lot of time talking about 18 Windmill Hill Road, which is up for ZBA, I think, this week. It's a property that has a fence around it, and the fence is visible from the cemetery. And there was a discussion about whether or not, and the fence is a by right item, but the house was going to be built on the highest point of the land. And the upshot of it was a 4-to-1 vote not to object to it, not to convey any objection to the ZBA. And then they discussed their current projects and then things that are upcoming with assigned projects for future development or future projects like open land, stone walls, lots of things like that. Middle school building committee, I attended, and Stephen pretty much covered that, but that packet of information has a lot of good information in it. And then, of course, like many of the rest of us, we went to a candidate forum yesterday, sponsored by the league, and that was very informative. Thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Who would like to go next?
Hey, if no one else will, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the most consequential thing that I wanted to just share a slide for, just because I think it's helpful, is the Concord Middle School Building Committee. Of course, Stephen already introduced some of the major decisions there, but just to run down the space recommendations that were voted in the subcommittee and then voted unanimously in the main committee, is that they have decided to recommend a gym that's about 7,000 square feet, which would support one regulation size court. I know that many of us have received emails asking for 2 courts. There's some concern about increasing the impervious area of the site beyond what the zoning would allow, as well as there's some possibility of courts in other locations with other kinds of development options going forward. The auditorium, likewise, there's been some public comment about possibly increasing the auditorium size, but the design subcommittee felt that that single grade auditorium, like this 270 seat capacity, was what was consistent with the educational plan. And then with the other PE related space is a alt PE space for other kinds of activities, about 1,600 square feet, that was approved. A 1,000 square foot maker space, although there's still some possibility of other design alternatives, but that's been part of the space recommendations. And then finally, the media center, which is recommended at 3,400. There was only one dissenting vote there. So you can see these major spaces that then would complement the classroom space at the school. And so now with those space recommendations, there would be a design proposed. So moving on then from, and then I think Stephen already covered the sustainability kind of breakthrough of that CMLP suggesting that they could install solar at the site and I think help us achieve the ultimate net zero goals that there are for that site. Then moving on to the Housing Authority, the key item there is that many well-qualified candidates have applied for the executive director position. And so now the subcommittee is in the position of narrowing that down, and they may even have face-to-face interviews. Shocking, but yes, they're trying to see how they might be able to make that happen, you know, under the right social distancing protocol. I did also check in briefly with the Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee. The key thing there is that the Minuteman Media Network is taking the lead on the preparations for the virtual celebration, basically assembling new and older footage to create the appropriate kind of commemoration. And then the committee also deliberated on the honored citizen for 2021. And so that you can hold your breath for the answer on that one. Then there were the 2229 Main Street and NMI StarMet committees. So the 229 Main Street committee focused on recent well data, sampling data for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, so two chemicals of concern that have been found both at the W.R. Gray site and at this site, and really just understanding kind of where they're coming from, where they're going. NMI StarMet responded and focused on comments that have been made about the potential for the town assuming liability for the site and risks that might come from that. And then also on just refining the executive summary for the report that we should be seeing in relatively short order. And then finally, the MAGIC meeting where there was a discussion of the landlines initiative, which is greenways that are going all the way across the country in some cases, but just the local components for that that need to be coordinated among the various communities. The healthy aging housing initiatives. And then there was a discussion about regional vaccination programs. And so, I think that maybe the MAPC staff wasn't really on understanding or on board yet with our proposal to do a regional vaccination center. I think they learned that there is a lot of passion for that among the members. And so they have now offered to write a letter of support. And I did inquire with Stephen, who said that maybe, this isn't yet a time where we need it. And Susan Rask also weighed in. So if they ask for that, I will then, relay that request to the MAGIC staff.
Thank you, Matt. Terry.
Yeah, I have a question, Matt, on the middle school, the slide you were showing.
Yeah. I can put it back up.
Okay. Okay, so these numbers that we're seeing here, are they all included in the basic $80 to $100 million project, or are some of these, like the gym or the alt PE, are going to require outside funding?
No, these all, I think, would fit within the, at least now, budget that we have, right at the limit, but still within the limit as it stands.
Matt or Linda, can I just comment on that?
Sure.
The project budget is 100. The building budget is 80.
Right.
And the items here are within that $80 million budget estimate. There's $20 million in soft costs. So I want to because people have been saying 80 to 100, it's 80 for the building and then an additional 20 in soft costs. And so these are all the $80 million estimate.
Yeah,
Which
but I was saying that 100 is for the total all-in budget. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still pretty high.
With escalation and everything else.
Right. Thanks for that clarification. The other use of the 80 to 100 was based on a previous town meeting where the total, including everything, construction and soft costs, was going to be between 80 million and 100 million. But now we understand it's going to be closer to 100 million. I get that. The 80 is the construction, and then there's soft costs. But I had also heard that some of these alternatives that they were considering might need additional funding, and that's what I wanted to clarify. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, many of the alternatives that have been proposed that would exceed that would be things like expanding the auditorium to a multi-grade auditorium or adding an additional court for the gymnasium. Those are both examples.
Okay, Matt, does that conclude your?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that information. All right, Jane.
I'll be short and sweet. Actually, I think, Linda, you already reported the main news from the NRC commission hearing on the 3rd, which is that Will Holden is joining the Delia's team in as our new land steward, or director of land planning. So when that's going to be, I know something that she has had as a long-term goal, and I think that's great that we've accomplished it. Then the only other point worthy of noting here was the continued discussion on the 50-foot no-build plans. But again, that's a continuation of a longstanding NRC conversation. The Commission on Disability met on March 4th. And I'm just putting a plug out for everybody that has committees or commissions that are behind in their notes, in their minutes. We all met for this explicit purpose of approving the minutes of January 14th, February 11th, and February 18th to bring us up to date. So, and I want to send kudos to the commission who was willing to come together just for the purpose of that. And then the HDC met on the 4th, and I would call it the sign meeting, because while the public hearings that we saw listed might have sounded from their addresses very interesting, and it was fascinating to listen to the HDC discuss, for instance, the Adams and Beasley Associates sign for their construction period at 15 Monument Street. Sometimes I even, after 4 years on the HDC as liaison, I still am amazed at the level of care that the HDC stewards towards the historic districts in town, even for periods of time like a year and a half in terms of the signage that's going to be present. And then there was a discussion, which I would also commend the new owners of 44 Barrett's Mill Road came in front of the commission to ask about how to go about putting solar panels on their property. And again, they're very interested in having solar, but we're concerned about the way the HDC might view solar panels on the most solar appropriate roof line, which would be the front of the house. And so I think that they left encouraged to find other parts of their property to put panels on. And it just points again towards the need to find some way of aligning our sustainability and our climate change goals along with our HDC goals. And, there was a discussion on the new panels that look more and more like roof tiles or roof components. But unless, Concord and other places are going to underwrite the cost differential, that's a major imposition on a homeowner. So, and with that, I will leave everybody to Linda's liaison reports.
Oh, thank you, Jane. Terry, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Right, so Susan covered the capital planning task force. We have been meeting every other week and will continue to do so. The charge expires in June, so we're fully expecting to come before the select board before June with the final report. I attended the West Concord Junction District Committee. They've received a grant from the Mass Cultural Council to do some really good marketing and public relations with a placard, maps, bags, brochures, and they're hard at work starting on that. And their charge is up for renewal in May with the state. They were first designated in 2016. And so they're hoping to be renewed. They're one of 50 cultural districts in the state. Also, this committee is recruiting for 3 new members this spring. They especially are looking for people with experience in marketing, public relations, and grant writing. So that's the West Concord Junction District Committee. I also attended the Transportation Advisory Committee Subcommittee for bicyclists. And that was a really interesting meeting with good attendance and lots of different points of view were discussed. And there was general agreement that safety is the top priority. And that there's a lot of different groups within the biking community. It's a very diverse, it's not one group. There's lots of subgroups within that. So there's a lot of learning and surveying that they want to do to figure out who these people are, where they're going, and why. So it's a really good start for that subcommittee. And I also attended the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee. They are busy coordinating with the town of Sudbury. The last half mile in Concord will be going out to bid at the same time as the Sudbury portion. And there could be a delay in this due to some licenses that need to be gotten from the state for the two brooks in Sudbury. So right now, that project is supposed to be on the tip for 2022, and we're hoping it's not going to be delayed to 2023. In order to do that, we need to get some waivers. So we're busy working on that. And finally, MAPC has agreed to take some counts along with town volunteers, a kind of before and after snapshot before the bridge over Route 2 is completed and after, to get some usage statistics on our rail trail. That's the end of my report.
Thank you. I attended the the Tax Fairness Committee, where they're discussing the senior means tax exempt warrant article that will be on this year's warrant. And they basically spent time talking about the content of that warrant article. I also attended the school committee meeting where they moved the next iteration of their proposed budget, which is closer to the guidelines that have been given them. The final presentation of that budget will be tomorrow night. And that concludes my liaison reports. Are there any public comments this evening? Yes, Mary Hartman.
Yes, thank you, Linda. Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green. I'm also the chair of the Finance Committee. And I just wanted to alert the select board that I had a conversation this morning with Carrie LaFleur, our finance director. And I also have an email in front of me. And her latest projection for the balance in free cash will be 5.6 million, which is 4.8%. So I just wanted to make you aware of that when you're considering requests for free cash. I know this could change, and it probably will change, but I just wanted to give you that news today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tanya.
Hi, yeah, Mark was...
sorry, your name and address?
Tanya Gale, 62 Prescott Road. Mark was listening from the beginning, but I came later. So I just had a couple questions and possibly a comment. Mark said that you said something about articles for town meeting, the draft being due March 19th. I just want to make sure that that does not apply to citizen petition articles. They usually have until the last minute, as I know, and I can of course double check with Carmen or Kari.
Yeah, the outside date, the warrant closes on March 26th,
right,
at 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. And my other question is, Mark said that you would be discussing Junction Park and safety next week, during your meeting next week, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. I was wondering if you are also likely to then discuss the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee's letter about the Reformatory Branch Trail at the same time?
That's not on the agenda at this point.
Okay, thank you. Because when it is, it would be great to have public comment during the discussion of that, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Any other public comments? I'm not seeing any right now, so I'm going to, our next item is to adjourn to executive session pursuant to MGL's Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation in the case of LY versus Kester Kruger, CCTV, Inc., Town of Concord and Concord Carlisle School District, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the committees as declared by the chair. Would the clerk please read the motion? Whoops, you're on mute, Susan.
Susan, you're on mute.
Move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation in the case of LY versus Kester Kruger, CCTV, Inc., Town of Concord, and Concord Carlisle School District, as an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the committee as declared by the chair.
All right, do I hear a second?
I think we forgot to mention not to return to public session.
Okay, not to return to public session.
And that's correct, not to return to public session. Okay, would the clerk please?
I'll second that.
Thank you. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Escobedo?
Aye.
Ms. Ackerman?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Hotchkiss?
Aye.
And myself, Ms. Bates, aye.
That's unanimous and the chair so declares. So we will now conclude this meeting, and will our select board members please log into the next session as soon as you can. Thank you.